Week 3. Roman Temples. Welcome to this Roman temple. As you can see, I'm standing in an elegant, well-appointed building, and in so doing, I might be giving you the wrong idea about what a Roman temple is and what it does. Let's go to a very basic Roman temple. Yes, I'm standing in what the Romans would call a templum, and yes, it's a bare patch of empty ground. This is because, for the Romans, a templum was a place, not a building, and as long as that place was officially sacred to a god, it was a templum. In fact, it could be sacred to several gods, since the gods of Rome, like most who lived in that overcrowded city, did not mind sharing. The next thing to note is that a temple is not a church, even though several temples have subsequently been converted to become churches. A temple was where a god lived. Some gods had many temples, but to the Romans this was not an issue. Many of their richer citizens had several houses as well. But the point is, the temple is where the god lived, not where you went to do your worshipping, which is why you don't find rows of seats inside a Roman temple. You could do your worshipping anywhere you pleased, and many Roman religious ceremonies happened outdoors. So this is why you don't find an altar to the god inside the temple. It was usually in the courtyard outside, where there was lots of room for crowds and sacrifices and getting the sacrificial animals up. Inside the temple was just a single room, the cella, where there was usually a statue of the god and a treasury of goods which had been dedicated to the god stored in the basement. In fact, the Temple of Saturn in the Roman Forum was also the Roman treasury. Now, because the Romans tended to think of their gods as super citizens, but citizens anyway, they assumed that, like any other citizens, the gods would appreciate a roof over their heads, and the more luxurious, the better. So they constructed a building on the templum. Properly speaking, the building was an edes, from whence we get the word edifice. But the Romans also casually referred to these buildings as temples. Though there were exceptions, the best known being the famous dome of the Pantheon, most temples were basic rectangular blocks, about twice as long as they were wide, with embellishments, such as a porch, which made up a third of the length. So, let's view a few of these Roman temples. Properly speaking, a Roman temple should face east. But the Romans were a practical lot, and they weren't going to remodel their city in order to orient their temples properly. You will notice a tendency for temples to appear on the west sides as squares, but that's about it as far as your average Roman was prepared to yield to this rule. So you'll notice that, even more than Greek temples, the Romans liked to build a large stylobate. That's a sort of stone platform which raises the temple well above ground level. This not only made the temple more impressive, but was highly practical for temples in places like the Roman Forum, which was regularly flooded by the Tiber. Some temples, such as the Temple of Castor and Pollux, had porches which partially enclosed the stairs and made them look all the more impressive. The most important part of temple decoration are the columns. In fact, the Romans classified their temples by how the columns were arranged. So we're going to do some technical language here. Firstly, there were different styles of column. Have a look at them in this illustration. You can see Tuscan, Ionic, Doric, Corinthian, and Composite. By and large, the Romans favored Corinthian, and you will see some examples. How the columns were arranged was also important. Almost all temples had a porch, the pronaos, which included the steps leading up to the entrance. So a temple only with columns which supported this porch was a pro-style temple. A temple where there was a colonnade going all around the temple was peripeteral, as in this temple of Venus and Roma, which stood near the Colosseum. Many temples stopped short of extending the colonnade around the back, but you also got a pseudodipteral temple, which had the side columns built into the wall. The spacing of the columns, intercolumniation, was also important. Closely spaced columns made a temple seem taller. Further spaced columns made them seem wider. The temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus was areostyle, which meant that the columns were more than 3 column widths apart. In pycnostyle, they were just 1.5 widths apart. Systyle had 2 column diameters apart, eustyle was 2.25 diameters, and diastyle was 3 diameters. The temple was also defined by the number of columns across the frontage. Pterostyle had 4 columns across the front. 6 columns made a hexastyle, for example, the Temple of Concord, whilst octastyle was 8. Have a look at the Temple of Castrum Pollux. And the Temple of Venus in Rome had 10, a decastyle temple. A double row of columns supporting the porch made the temple dipteral. The architrave is the bit at the top of the column, and above this is the frieze, an engraved strip running around the top of the temple. In the cornice, which supports the pediment of the roof, you find the tympanum, which often had an elegant sculpture inside. Sometimes the dedication of the temple was to be found on the tympanum or on the architrave. So, when we look at the Mason Carré, which is the best surviving example of an actual Roman temple in Nîmes, rather than saying, "Oh, it's a Roman temple," we can nod wisely and say, "Ah, a pseudo-diptero-systyle Corinthian temple, nice architrave and frieze, but a very plain tympanum."